It began with a man who looked unstoppable. Millions of views. A platform that launched legends. A brand once called the gatekeeper of hip-hop, but behind the flashing lights and viral interviews, a storm was brewing. Scandals, betrayals, greed, and secrets buried deep under the surface would soon come crashing down. The empire that seemed untouchable would collapse in real time. And in the wreckage, one question remained: how did Adam22, the man who built No Jumper, destroy everything he created? At first, No Jumper was the golden ticket of underground hip-hop. Adam22, a BMX rider from New Hampshire with no real ties to the streets, managed to insert himself into a world that didn't belong to him. Through sheer audacity, he transformed his small channel into a cultural powerhouse. Interviews with artists like Juice WRLD, Lil Peep gave a voice to a new generation. Each video wasn't just content, it was a cultural moment that could launch a career overnight. No Jumper became the stage where underground artists turned mainstream. But in this unlikely success story lay the first cracks. The outsider who built a kingdom had no roots in the culture he was profiting from. And as his fame grew, so did the whispers that something was deeply wrong. The world watched when Boom Gang stumbled into the studio, so intoxicated he could barely stay upright. Adam had every reason to cancel the interview, but instead, he aired it. 5 million views later, the spectacle became both a viral hit and a stain on his reputation. The guest accused him of having no morals. The public began asking whether No Jumper was documenting culture or exploiting its darkest corners. What looked like bold risk-taking revealed itself as a dangerous pattern. Controversy wasn't an accident. It was the business model. And once the line between journalism and exploitation blurred, it was only a matter of time before everything spiraled out of control. Inside No Jumper, chaos brewed. Trusted figures like Housephone and Trell weren't just co-hosts, they were the foundation that gave the channel credibility in the community. But cracks widened when private, painful information about Housephone surfaced on air. Adam was begged to edit it out, yet he refused. The fallout was explosive. Heated arguments erupted. Accusations of betrayal spread. Friendships built over years were destroyed in weeks. One by one, the core team walked out, declaring they could no longer stand by a man who had lost all respect for those closest to him. The empire was losing its soldiers. Without them, Adam stood exposed and isolated. As the old guard left, Adam doubled down on controversy. Fistfights broke out live on air. Gang rivals were brought face to face, encouraged to stir drama. And when he interviewed a man tied to the murder of Pop Smoke, the backlash was immediate. Critics said this wasn't hip-hop history, it was sacrilege. The empire that once uplifted artists had turned into a circus. Violence, disrespect, and outrage weren't accidents. They were programming. And every click came at the cost of his credibility. The show was no longer about music. It was about chaos. If the platform's scandals weren't enough, Adam's personal life became its own spectacle. With his wife Lena the Plug, he pivoted to explicit podcasting. Interviews blurred into adult entertainment, and his marriage became content. The final humiliation came when Lena filmed with another man, Jason Love, who openly mocked Adam afterwards. Suddenly, the man who built his reputation in a hyper-masculine culture was the subject of ridicule. Rumors spread that Lena had lost respect for him. In the world of hip-hop, where strength and dominance are everything, Adam's image crumbled. The man who once dictated culture was now the punchline. Then came the biggest betrayal of all. In 2025, Adam announced the launch of Adam22 Coin, a meme cryptocurrency he promised would change the game. Fans rushed in, pouring millions into what seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But within hours, the coin collapsed. Insiders had dumped their holdings, wiping out the community that trusted him. CoffeeZilla stepped in, exposing the operation as a pump and dump. What should have been a celebration turned into financial ruin for countless fans. And while Adam tried to play the victim, tweeting that he too had been scammed, the numbers told a different story. He profited. His fans were left with nothing. Behind the scenes, the empire was bleeding money. Adam admitted he had made a fatal mistake overexpanding during the pandemic. A $4 million building, dozens of employees, and countless projects drained resources. Then, ad revenue collapsed. The No Jumper Instagram was mysteriously deleted. Lawsuits piled up. To stay afloat, Adam began cutting staff, shutting down his store, and liquidating inventory. Desperate, he turned to fans, offering memberships for $5 to $100. But instead of support, the backlash was vicious. A millionaire begging for bailouts struck viewers as pathetic. The trust that had fueled No Jumper's growth was gone. By the middle of 2025, the No Jumper empire was no longer just bleeding from within, it was under direct attack from the outside. The lawsuits began trickling in, but one case in particular exposed the fragile foundation on which Adam22 had built his brand. The name was Jerem Reed, a man who claimed he had been brutally assaulted inside No Jumper's Burbank headquarters. According to legal documents filed with the Los Angeles County courts, Reed alleged that during a December 2020 incident he was attacked so severely that he suffered a concussion, head trauma, and over $10,000 worth of property damage. For years, the No Jumper studio had been treated less like a professional workplace and more like a stage for chaos. On-air fights weren't accidents, they were marketing tools. Clips of guests throwing punches, slamming tables, or storming out became viral content, bringing in millions of views. Fans tuned in not just for interviews, but for the possibility that anything could erupt at any moment. What seemed like edgy entertainment slowly became the brand's identity. But in chasing shock value, Adam had forgotten a dangerous truth: when violence is encouraged for views, sooner or later, that violence spills beyond the cameras. Reed's lawsuit painted a disturbing picture. He claimed he had entered the No Jumper studio for what was supposed to be a regular appearance, only for the environment to spiral into hostility. He alleged negligence, claiming Adam and his staff allowed a toxic environment where physical confrontations weren't just tolerated but effectively celebrated. The legal filing even cited past examples of on-air chaos, arguing that No Jumper had cultivated a reputation for violence and therefore bore direct responsibility for what happened to him. The case immediately gained attention in hip-hop circles and beyond. TMZ obtained the documents, publishing Reed's accusations for millions to see. The headlines were damning. No Jumper sued over alleged assault, guest claims brain trauma. Overnight, the same spectacle that had built Adam's empire became the evidence tearing it down. What fans once laughed at now seemed grotesque. What once looked like gritty authenticity suddenly looked like negligence and exploitation. Behind the scenes, legal experts began speculating about the financial fallout. A concussion claim tied to negligence could carry not just medical expenses, but punitive damages, punishments intended to send a message. If a court found that Adam had intentionally created an unsafe environment for the sake of profit, the financial penalties could be catastrophic. The irony was bitter. The very formula that made No Jumper famous was now a liability threatening to bankrupt it completely. Worse still, this wasn't the only storm on the horizon. Former employees, many of whom had left during the mass exodus of 2023, began whispering about filing their own claims. Allegations of a toxic workplace, harassment, unpaid wages, and unsafe conditions surfaced in interviews and social media posts. Each new accusation chipped away at what little credibility Adam had left. The lawsuits were no longer just about individual incidents, they were about a pattern, a culture of chaos that had been rewarded for years. Public reaction was swift and unforgiving. On Reddit and Twitter, fans who once defended No Jumper began calling for accountability. "This is what happens when you turn pain into content," one commenter wrote. Another added, "He built an empire on exploitation. Now the same chaos he monetized is coming back to haunt him." The sentiment was clear. What had been entertainment was now seen as proof of Adam's moral bankruptcy. The violence lawsuits carried more than just financial danger, they carried symbolic weight. They represented the collapse of the illusion Adam had built. No longer could he claim to be just a podcaster documenting culture. The courts were treating him as a businessman who profited from danger and failed to protect those around him. And while fans once gave him the benefit of the doubt, by 2025 almost no one was left in his corner. In legal terms, the Reed case may drag on for years. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict had already been delivered. No Jumper wasn't edgy. It wasn't authentic. It was reckless, dangerous, and toxic. And Adam, the man who once positioned himself as the curator of hip-hop culture, was now branded as the architect of a dangerous circus where people got hurt and where he alone profited from their pain. For Adam22, the lawsuits were more than legal battles. They were a mirror held up to everything he had built. And what stared back at him was a monster of his own making. The story of Adam22 is not just about one man's fall, it's about what happens when ambition crosses into exploitation, and when a platform loses its soul in pursuit of views. By late 2025, the empire known as No Jumper lay in ruins. The platform that once launched careers, defined underground culture, and commanded millions of loyal followers had become a hollow shell, clinging to relevance through cheap stunts, lawsuits, and scandal. At its peak, No Jumper had been hailed as the underground's breakfast club, a place where new voices could break through the noise. Adam's interviews were once praised for being raw, unfiltered, and deeply connected to the pulse of hip-hop. But as the years passed, the vision that had fueled his rise evaporated. The music faded into the background, replaced by staged fights, OnlyFans models, and adult content. Instead of being remembered as the man who documented a golden era of underground rap, Adam became remembered as the man who exploited it until nothing was left. The damage to his legacy wasn't caused by a single scandal, but by the accumulation of betrayals, the sexual misconduct allegations that haunted his name, the humiliation of his marriage becoming public spectacle, the crypto pump and dump that robbed his own fans, the lawsuits painting him as reckless and negligent, the federal scrutiny tying him to RICO investigations. Each blow chipped away at his reputation until there was almost nothing left to defend, and perhaps the most telling sign of his downfall was the silence. When controversies erupted in the past, allies rushed to defend him. Co-hosts, artists, and industry insiders would step forward to vouch for his intentions, insisting he was misunderstood. But by 2025, that support had evaporated. Former employees stayed silent. Artists who once credited No Jumper for their rise distanced themselves. The community that once saw Adam as a gatekeeper now saw him as a liability. The collapse carried with it a bitter lesson. Glory borrowed from tragedy never lasts. Adam had made a fortune exploiting chaos, but in doing so, he destroyed the very foundation he stood on. Hip-hop had welcomed him in as an outsider, but he had failed to treat that trust with respect. Instead, he commodified pain, violence, and humiliation until it consumed him. Even his attempts to rebuild rang hollow. When he spoke about wanting to slow down, build something stable, and focus on the long term, fans dismissed it as just another performance. After years of chasing drama, very few believed he was capable of genuine change. His every move was seen through the lens of exploitation. If he launched a new project, people assumed it was a scam. If he apologized, people assumed it was manipulation. His credibility was gone, and without credibility, no media empire can survive. The final irony is that Adam22's downfall wasn't caused by outside forces, it was caused by himself. Every choice he made, every scandal he embraced, every line he crossed for views was another brick pulled from the foundation of his empire. By 2025, the walls had collapsed entirely, and so Adam22, once the kingmaker of underground hip-hop, became a cautionary tale. His story now lives as a warning to every influencer, every podcaster, every content creator chasing clout. Because the truth is simple, when you build your empire on the pain of others, when you treat culture as currency and chaos as profit, the bill always comes due. In the end, there was no one left to save him. No artists defending his name. No fans rushing to his aid. No empire left to stand on. Just the ashes of a legacy that could have been legendary, but instead became tragic. The question isn't whether Adam22 can recover, because some wounds never heal. The question is whether the industry will learn from his fall. Because his story proves one thing: in the pursuit of fame and fortune, if you lose your integrity, you lose everything.